Hello, everyone. Tonight we're going to wander through smoke and silence into the heart of Spain. The year is 1808, and the streets of Madrid smell faintly of gunpowder and orange peels. You can almost hear the cobblestones echo beneath French boots, the kind of rhythm that makes you realize you probably won't survive this, at least not as the same person you were before. You wake up inside a world of banners and bayonets. Napoleon's empire stretches across Europe, but here in Spain, the air feels stubborn. The sun presses hot against whitewashed walls. The smell of horses and bread mixes with fear, and you sense that history itself is holding its breath. When the French first arrived, they said it was to protect Spain, a polite word for taking control. The royal family, tangled in betrayal, handed over their power like a gambler sliding his last coin across the table. Napoleon placed his brother Joseph Bonaparte on the Spanish throne and expected applause. Instead, he got fire. You walk through Puerta del Sol, the main square of Madrid, where crowds whisper and glare at blue-coated soldiers. Someone spits near a French officer's boots. Another man hums a forbidden tune, the kind of tune that sounds like defiance. On May 2nd, 1808, the first real spark lights. A mob gathers as French troops try to move Spanish royals out of the city. Women scream. Bells ring from every church tower. A single gunshot, no one knows who fired first. And suddenly the crowd becomes an army. You find yourself caught in it. A wave of fury armed with kitchen knives, farm tools, anything that can pierce flesh or pride. Viva España, someone shouts. It's a cry that shakes the air. Napoleon's generals, cold and efficient, respond with brutal precision. Murat's cavalry charge through the streets. By evening, the uprising is crushed. The pavement runs dark in the rain, and by dawn, firing squads line up survivors against monastery walls. The bodies slump into stillness, but the silence that follows isn't peace. It's the sound of a nation deciding to fight back forever. Later, Francisco Goya will paint the 3rd of May, 1808, capturing that moment. A man raising his arms against the muskets, his shirt white as moonlight, the first true martyr of modern Spain. You're standing there too, maybe, in your imagination, the air trembling with the smell of black powder and candle wax. The French think they've restored order, but history, that patient trickster, has other plans. Across the countryside, small towns smolder with resentment. Priests whisper sermons that sound more like battle speeches. Farmers hide muskets in haystacks. Children carry messages between villages because no one suspects them. It's a slow awakening, like a storm gathering behind the mountains. Napoleon's army is powerful, trained, disciplined, but Spain is something else. A labyrinth of narrow roads, wild hills, and a people who refuse to kneel. One officer writes home, "We have taken Spain, but we do not possess it." You can almost hear the exhaustion in his words, the sense that victory has become a mirage. As the summer deepens, French soldiers begin to vanish along mountain passes. Supply wagons never arrive. Camps are found empty, with only the smell of burned coffee and gun oil. Something unseen moves in the hills, a shadow war, the kind that no emperor can control. Historians are still debating whether Napoleon underestimated the Spanish or simply misunderstood them. But you can feel the answer in the air. This isn't just a war of armies. It's a war of wills. For now, you linger by a fire in a darkened farmhouse, hearing distant gunfire echo through the night. A grandmother mutters prayers beside you, her hands rough from years of work. Someone passes you a piece of bread, still warm from the oven, and for a moment, even in war, you taste something like hope. A rooster crows somewhere far away, a fragile sound, yet defiant, almost mocking the empire that promised peace through conquest. You wonder if Napoleon himself hears it faintly from across the Pyrenees. Outside, dawn paints the horizon with pale light. The French flag still flutters above the city, but beneath it, in whispers and shadows, rebellion has taken root. The kind that doesn't burn out, the kind that waits. And as you close your eyes, the fire crackling softly, you can sense the next chapter coming, not from generals or kings, but from ordinary people learning how to fight without an army. The war for Spain has just begun. The fire from Madrid's uprising may have been crushed, but Spain herself was just beginning to breathe. The year is 1809. Across the rugged Sierras, dawn creeps over fields of olive and dust. You find yourself among peasants who no longer wait for kings or orders. They move by instinct, quiet, fast, invisible. They call themselves guerrilleros, the little warriors. But don't let the name fool you. These small bands will bleed an empire dry. You're walking with one tonight. Their boots are mismatched, their coats patched with old cloth, their muskets as old as their fathers. But their eyes, oh, their eyes burn brighter than any French torch. They strike at night, fade by sunrise, melt into the landscape like ghosts. Mule cart passes carrying barrels of flour, and you realize it's not flour, it's gunpowder, hidden under bread. Napoleon's armies were made for grand battlefields. Clean lines, perfect formations, drums that thunder like clockwork. But here there are no lines, no order, just shadows, whispers, and sudden death from behind a rock wall. Historians are still debating whether this is where the term guerrilla warfare was truly born. What's certain is that this land, twisted by mountains and pride, turned strategy itself into chaos. Every village has its secret. A priest who hides rebels in the cellar. A widow who poisons a French officer's wine. A boy who delivers coded messages in loaves of bread. You watch them work, quietly amazed. It's like the entire countryside has joined one enormous silent conspiracy. And the French? They're unraveling. Soldiers who once marched with discipline now stare at the hills with fear. Every shadow looks like an ambush. A letter home says, "We hold the towns, but the roads belong to the devils." Napoleon sends his best marshals, Soult, Ney, Massena, each a legend in Europe. But Spain devours legends. The marches are endless, the maps useless, and every victory feels hollow. By 1810, Joseph Bonaparte's throne in Madrid is little more than a joke. He drinks Spanish wine at royal banquets, while just beyond the city gates, French convoys are burned and their couriers hanged from fig trees. Meanwhile, in the west, British troops under a new commander, Arthur Wellesley, land in Portugal. You might know him later by another name, the Duke of Wellington. Calm, precise, the opposite of Napoleon's fire. Where the emperor charges, Wellington waits. He fights wars like chess. Cold, deliberate, quiet. His plan is simple: defend Portugal, then grind the French out of Spain inch by inch. But his secret weapon isn't his army. It's the land itself. Under his direction, Portuguese engineers build a series of massive hidden fortifications north of Lisbon, the lines of Torres Vedras, 3 rings of forts and redoubts, stretching across 80 kilometers of hills and valleys. To the French, they seem invisible until it's too late. Napoleon's generals attack and break against them like waves on a cliff. You stand there watching the fog roll over the silent hills, hearing the distant sound of cannon fire echo like thunder. Then, nothing. Just wind and birds and the slow realization that for the first time, the French advance has stopped. A joke spreads among British troops. If the devil himself came for us, we'd just build a wall and make him wait. You can almost hear the chuckles. Tired and muddy but proud. In the towns behind the lines, life flickers back. Blacksmiths hammer iron again. Children laugh under olive trees. And women wash clothes in streams, though always with one eye on the horizon. Peace never really comes, only pauses. Still, you feel something shift. The invincible empire has met resistance that no cannon can crush. Endurance. A farmer's patience. A shepherd's silence. You glance toward the horizon, and there, faint and golden, the sun sets over the Iberian hills. A wind carries the smell of gunpowder and time. You realize for the first time in this long war, the French aren't advancing anymore. They're retreating. Slowly, reluctantly, as if every step backward admits a truth no emperor wants to hear. Empires fall not in battles, but in exhaustion. And Spain, stubborn, scarred, still standing, is proof of that. So you lie back against a rock. You wake to the sound of boots in mud, hundreds of them, squelching in rhythm, as if the earth itself were swallowing the men whole. The year is 1810 now, and you've crossed into Portugal. The British uniforms flash red against the rain-drenched hills, a stubborn contrast to the endless gray sky. You've joined Wellington's army, at least for now. Or maybe it's more accurate to say they've joined you. The Iron March has begun. The Duke of Wellington, as the world will later call him, is not a man of loud words. He's all angles, sharp jaw, colder eyes, a mind that measures distance and death with the precision of a clockmaker. You see him often, sketching maps on the ground with a riding crop surrounded by aides who nod like metronomes. He doesn't shout. He calculates. The British troops look tired, their coats stained, their jokes as dry as their rations. You hear one mutter, "Spain? Thought it'd be all sun and oranges, not rain and dysentery." You can't help but laugh. Humor, even when damp, is still a weapon. The plan is simple, which means it's impossibly hard. The French hold much of Spain, but Wellington intends to cut through them piece by piece using time and terrain. He knows something Napoleon's marshals refuse to accept. Spain fights like the land, slow, stubborn, unpredictable. You march with the men toward the fortress town of Ciudad Rodrigo. The siege begins under a pale moon. Cannons thud like distant thunder. You can feel each impact through your boots, through your ribs. The night glows faintly orange as gunpowder and rain mix into a metallic haze. Inside the fortress, French soldiers huddle by the walls, muttering prayers or curses. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. You wonder what they think of this war far from home, surrounded by a people who smile at them by day and stab them by night. Historians are still debating whether Wellington was coldly brilliant or just lucky at the right moments. But when you see how he times the final assault, perfectly just before dawn, when the fog still clings to the earth, you start to understand the difference between genius and madness. The storming of Ciudad Rodrigo is over in hours, but costs hundreds of lives. You watch men climb ladders into fire, the smell of sulfur thick enough to taste. A young drummer boy collapses beside you, his drum split clean in half. He doesn't cry, just stares at the stars as if wondering whether heaven has a beat he can follow. When it's over, the British flag rises over the walls. The men cheer, half in triumph, half in disbelief. Wellington barely smiles. "On to Badajoz," he murmurs. Another fortress, another test of endurance. You travel with the supply wagons through villages that are little more than ruins now. The people still wave as you pass, offering wine, bread, sometimes a silent blessing. The Spanish guerrillas move among the columns like ghosts, guiding, warning, vanishing. And somewhere far away, Napoleon himself begins to feel the tremor. Reports reach Paris. Tens of thousands of men lost, hundreds more deserting, supplies stolen by peasants. The emperor frowns, but only slightly. Spain is a distraction, he tells his marshals, a side theater. Yet the shadow of it stretches longer each day. One evening, you sit by a campfire with a Portuguese scout named Duarte, who swears that even the wolves are on Spain's side. "They only howl when the French move," he says, poking at the fire. You laugh, but then you hear it, faintly somewhere in the distance, and the low, mournful howl of an animal that doesn't know borders. It's a strange comfort, that sound. It makes you feel less alone in this mud-choked eternity. By 1812, the tide begins to turn. The Great Battle of Salamanca erupts like a thunderclap across the plains. You watch from a ridge as Wellington's lines maneuver in disciplined silence, then suddenly spring forward with terrifying precision. The French, caught mid-march, crumble like sandcastles in the rain. The roar is deafening. Drums, muskets, the metallic scream of bayonets meeting flesh. But amid it all, you notice something simple. A flock of birds rises from the fields, startled by the noise, circling above the chaos in slow, graceful loops. You follow them with your eyes, wishing for a moment you could fly that high, away from history, away from all this blood pretending to be destiny. When the battle ends, the air smells of wet earth and smoke. Wellington's army stands victorious for now. The French retreat, leaving behind cannon wheels and broken standards. That night, in the flicker of the firelight, a soldier tells you a joke. Why did Napoleon go to Spain? You shrug. To lose his temper and then his empire. You both laugh until you cough. It's dark humor, the only kind left. As you drift toward sleep, wrapped in your damp cloak, you think of how strange war is, how it breaks men and makes legends at the same time. You think of Madrid's uprising, of Inez and the villagers, of Wellington's quiet eyes. You think of how all of this will someday be a chapter in a book, and how no book will ever smell like this, of rain and gunpowder, and human stubbornness. Somewhere to the east, Napoleon readies another campaign. This time, the rain has stopped. The sky stretches out above you in a shade of tarnished silver, and for the first time in months you can smell spring. The year is 1813, and you're back in northern Spain, where the empire that once seemed eternal is beginning to rot from within. Napoleon's marshals, Soult, Suchet-Massena, march like ghosts of their former selves, their armies hollowed out by hunger and disillusion. You move through villages where the French once demanded tribute, and now beg for bread. Soldiers trade medals for food. Officers write home not of glory but of mud, lice, and memories they wish they could burn. The great emperor himself is far away, drowning in the frozen rivers of Russia. The men who remain here in Spain know the truth before he does. His empire has cracked. You pass through Burgos, or what's left of it. The city smells of gunpowder and rain-soaked parchment. The cathedral's bells hang silent, the streets littered with half-buried cannonballs. Once the French built a mighty fortress here. Now only its broken stones remain, like the bones of an empire scattered across the hill. The Spanish say the land remembers. Every valley, every grove of olive trees whispers of vengeance. You can hear it in the wind that sweeps across the plains, a language older than flags or kings. One afternoon, as you ride with a small band of guerrilleros, a French column appears ahead. Weary men, dragging their wounded, their uniforms torn and muddied. Their commander waves a white cloth, not in surrender, but in sheer exhaustion. "No more," he mutters in a thick accent, "no more Spain." Historians are still debating whether this was the moment the French truly lost the war. But standing there, watching that army crumble into dust, you don't need scholars to tell you. This is what defeat looks like before it's officially declared. You meet Inez again, in a ruined village near the Ebro. She's older now, her hair tangled, her smile faded but still defiant. "You're still alive," she says softly, as if that were an accomplishment greater than victory itself. She takes you to a church where the frescoes are cracked and bullet-pocked. The altar is gone, replaced by a wooden table where maps are spread. British officers and Spanish partisans huddled together, planning the next strike. For a brief, absurd moment, you think this is what freedom looks like. Improvised, half-starved, but alive. The Battle of Vittoria comes not long after, June 21st, 1813. Wellington commands again. His line stretched across the rolling green hills like the strings of a great harp. The French army, retreating toward the Pyrenees, turns to fight one last time. You can smell wet grass and fear. The morning mist curls around cannon barrels like breath. When the fighting begins, it's not elegant. It's chaos stitched together with courage. The French artillery roars, shaking the ground beneath your boots. You crouch behind a low stone wall as musket balls hiss past like angry insects. The Spanish militia beside you, old men and teenage boys, shout prayers and insults in equal measure. For God and for Spain. One cries and then ducks as a cannonball obliterates the wall in front of him. Wellington's coordination is almost frightening. Divisions moving like clockwork, striking where the French are weakest. He doesn't waste lives. He uses time itself as a weapon. By midday, the French line begins to buckle. And then, the sound no empire wants to hear, retreat. You watch as the once proud army disintegrates. Soldiers throwing muskets into the river to lighten their load. Carts overturn in the mud. Horses bolt. The air fills with the screams of the defeated. It's not glorious. It's pitiful. And yet somewhere in that collapse you feel something shift. History is changing shape before your eyes. The eagle folding its wings. When the smoke clears, the French baggage train lies abandoned. Inside, British soldiers find something extraordinary. Napoleon's private correspondence, his carriage, even his chamber music. They plunder it all, of course. Men at war rarely resist souvenirs. But the symbolic victory is immense. The emperor's shadow has finally lifted from Spain. That night by the river, you sit with Ines and a few others watching the stars bloom above the dark hills. No one speaks for a long time. The war isn't over yet. The French still cling to the Pyrenees, but you can feel the end coming, slow and inevitable. Like dawn. I used to think, Ines says, that when we won, it would feel like joy. She looks down at her scarred hands. Now it just feels quiet. You nod. She's right. Victory is quieter than anyone expects. It sounds like breathing after years of holding your breath. A British sergeant wanders by, drunk on cheap wine, singing something that might be a love song or a battle hymn. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. You laugh softly. At least someone's celebrating. Let him, she says. Tomorrow we bury the dead. The next morning you walk through the fields. The grass glistens with dew, and among it muskets and sabers lie scattered like forgotten relics. A small bird lands on a cannon wheel, chirping as if to reclaim the land from men. You think of how much blood it took for that bird to sing in peace. The empire of Napoleon, the one that once stretched from Lisbon to Warsaw, is unraveling. Piece by piece it is devouring itself. The Peninsular War has become the wound that won't heal. The lesson every conqueror forgets until it's too late. A nation is not land, or forts, or kings. It's the people who refuse to give up. As you look toward the Pyrenees, you can almost imagine the emperor himself watching from afar, realizing too late that Spain was never his to keep. And for the first time in a long while, you let yourself believe, maybe this really is the beginning of the end. By the time the frost settles on the hills of the Pyrenees, the war feels ancient, as though it began in another lifetime, under another sky. The year is 1814, and you are still alive, which feels both miraculous and slightly unfair. Spain is scarred, burned, broken in body, but not in spirit. The land smells of ashes and wet soil, of bread baked again in houses that used to be ruins. The French, beaten back at last, retreat over the mountains. You follow at a distance, not chasing, just watching. Their uniforms hang loose on thin frames. Some drag their boots through the snow. Others stare blankly ahead, as if they can't quite remember why they ever came here. You pass villages that were once silent and afraid. Now they ring with laughter again, tentative and cracked but real. Church bells that were melted into cannonballs are being recast into bells again. Fields once trampled by horses sprout tiny green shoots of wheat. Life, stubborn as ever, insists on returning. At dawn, you sit by a river that mirrors the pale sky. Across the water, a handful of French stragglers light a small fire. One of them raises a hand, not in surrender, not in threat, just in acknowledgement. You raise yours back. For a moment it feels like both sides understand something words can't touch, that no one ever really wins these things. The Peninsular War has lasted 6 long years. You've walked from Madrid's burning streets to Portugal's muddy fields, from the caves of guerrillas to the tent of a British general. You've seen the empire rise like lightning and fall like dust. And now, at the edge of winter, you finally understand what the title "The Lost Glory" means. It's not about the defeat of Napoleon. It's about the cost of pride, the price of ambition. It's about a nation that refused to die, and another that tried too hard to control what could never be tamed. Historians are still debating how decisive this war really was, whether Spain broke Napoleon or merely delayed his fall. But you, having trudged through its mud and smoke, know better. This was the first time his legend bled. Spain was the stone in the emperor's boot, the splinter under his crown. Inez is gone now, disappeared one night after the final skirmish, leaving only her knife stuck in a doorframe like a punctuation mark. Some say she joined another band in the north. Others whisper she married a farmer and swore never to speak of war again. You prefer to imagine her walking the hills, untamed, as eternal as the wind that carried her songs. You travel back to Madrid. The city feels both familiar and strange, like an old friend who's learned to walk with a limp. Buildings half rebuilt, people half healed. Goya is there somewhere, still painting. The horrors, the triumphs, the ghosts. You pass one of his new canvases through a workshop window. A dark shape in a white shirt, arms raised, staring at the rifles. You pause because you know that face. You've seen it in every village, in every mirror. Night falls gently, and with it a silence too big for words. The war is ending. Napoleon's star is fading fast. Soon he will be exiled to Elba, dreaming of return. But Spain, wounded, stubborn Spain, will keep limping forward, the way only survivors can. You find a small tavern near Puerta del Sol, the same square where it all began. Inside, candles flicker against cracked plaster walls. A fiddler plays something slow, mournful, and soft. The kind of tune that makes even the drunks quiet down. You sip your wine, cheap but warm, and listen. The song is about a shepherd who lost everything in a storm. But when the sun returned, he built again. That's Spain, you think, endlessly rebuilding from storms. A young man enters wearing a British officer's coat too large for him. He slaps a newspaper on the counter. "Napoleon abdicates." The headline reads. The tavern erupts into cheers. Someone raises a glass. You raise yours too, but not in triumph. In remembrance. Outside, the city glows with candlelight. Not from celebration, but from the simple fact that people are no longer afraid to be seen. You step into the street, the night cool and clean. A breeze carries the scent of jasmine and smoke. Above, the stars scatter across the sky like spilled gunpowder. Bright, chaotic, beautiful. You realize slowly that the story isn't about victory. It's about endurance. About how people can be ground into dust and still rise. How memory keeps burning even when empires crumble. A child runs past laughing, his toy horse bouncing on a string. You remember the boy who gave you 1 year ago in a burned village. So the emperor remembers we're still here. You smile. Maybe he was right. Maybe that's all history really is. A reminder that we're still here. You walk until dawn begins to smudge the horizon. The bells start ringing again, uneven, imperfect, alive. Their sound drifts across the rooftops, mingling with the smell of baking bread and morning smoke. Spain breathes again. The war is over, but the memory lingers, not as pain, not as pride, but as a whisper between generations. We endured. You take a final deep breath and look toward the mountains, where the last of the snow is melting. The sun climbs slowly, gilding the world in quiet gold. For once it feels like peace isn't a dream. It's just a long exhale. So, you keep walking, boots scuffing the cobblestones, hands in your pockets, a little smile forming despite yourself, because history, like sleep, doesn't end. It only fades softly into another dream. And tonight you'll dream of Spain, of lost glory, and of the people who refuse to lose themselves. You've wandered through the slow, burning epic of Spain's resistance, a story not of easy victory, but of endurance. From the riots of Madrid to the guerrilla ambushes in the hills, from Wellington's sieges to the great unraveling of the French Empire, you've seen how pride and power met the immovable wall of a nation's will. Napoleon's armies came as conquerors, but left as ghosts, chased not just by soldiers but by farmers, priests, and children who refused to forget who they were. Through the eyes of ordinary people, Inez, the boy with the toy horse, the weary peasants, history becomes alive not as a list of dates, but as breath and soil and heartbeat. When the last cannon fell silent, Spain stood bloodied but